The ocean is not silent. If you listen closely, you can hear the waves, the wind. But on the night of July 30th, 1945, in the middle of the Philippine Sea, the ocean sounded different. It sounded like screaming. 1,195 men went into the water. 5 days later, only 316 came out alive. It wasn't just the enemy torpedoes that killed them. It wasn't just the dehydration that turned their blood to poison. It wasn't just the sun that cooked their skin off. It was what was waiting beneath the surface. The USS Indianapolis didn't just sink. It became the site of the worst shark attack in human history. This is the story of the price of victory and the 4 days of hell that followed.
To understand the end, we have to understand the beginning. In July 1945, the USS Indianapolis was arguably the most important ship in the Pacific, not because of its guns, but because of its cargo. She had just completed a top-secret sprint from San Francisco to Tinian Island. Her mission? To deliver a crate. Inside that crate were the components for Little Boy, the atomic bomb that would be dropped on Hiroshima. Captain Charles McVay III was a good man, a third-generation Navy officer. He had pushed his ship to record-breaking speeds to deliver the bomb components safely. He had done his job. The delivery was made. The war was effectively won. Now they were just heading home. Or so they thought. The order was simple. Sail from Guam to Leyte for gunnery practice. But there was a problem, a fatal, bureaucratic error. Intelligence reports indicated that Japanese submarines were active in the area. A combat ship had been sunk just days prior on the same route. Captain McVay asked for a destroyer escort, a smaller ship equipped with sonar to hunt submarines. His request was denied. Not necessary, they said. The route is safe. So the Indianapolis sailed alone, blind because she had no sonar to detect subs, deaf because she was under strict radio silence. If anything happened to her, no one would know. No one would even know she was missing until she failed to arrive in Leyte days later. Sunday night, July 29th. It was hot, unbearably hot. Because the ship wasn't in combat conditions, many watertight hatches were left open to let air circulate. Sailors slept on the deck to escape the heat below. At 11:30 p.m., Captain McVay retired to his cabin. He ordered the ship to stop zigzagging, a defensive maneuver, because visibility was poor and he wanted to save time. It was a decision he would regret for the rest of his life.
Just beneath the surface, Mochitsura Hashimoto, commander of the Japanese submarine I-58, couldn't believe his luck. He saw a massive American warship sailing in a straight line, perfectly silhouetted against the moon. He didn't know it was the ship that delivered the atomic bomb. He just saw a target. He ordered 6 torpedoes loaded. At 0014 a.m., he gave the command, Fire! The first torpedo took off the bow. 40 feet of the ship simply evaporated. A massive column of water and aviation fuel shot into the sky. But the ship was still moving forward at 17 knots. Without a bow, she began to scoop up the ocean like a giant shovel. Seconds later, the second torpedo hit midship. This was the killing blow. It hit the fuel tanks and the powder magazine. The explosion ripped the Indianapolis in half. All communications were severed instantly. The lights went out. Down in the engine room, men were incinerated before they could even wake up. Chaos. Absolute chaos. Because the hatches were open for ventilation, the water rushed in uncontrollably. The ship listed 45 degrees to starboard in minutes. Men were trying to climb ladders that were suddenly horizontal. Captain McVeigh, thrown from his bed, scrambled to the bridge in his pajamas. He ordered the SOS signal sent. "We are sinking! We are sinking! Need immediate assistance!" But the radio room was damaged. Did the signal get out? They prayed it did. The order came, "Abandon ship." But how do you abandon a ship that is rolling over on top of you? Men slid down the hull, tearing their skin on barnacles. Others jumped from 30 feet up, breaking legs when they hit the water or landing on debris. And then the sounds of the dying ship began. The groaning of steel, the hissing of steam, the screaming of men trapped inside. At 00:27 a.m., just 12 minutes after the first torpedo hit, the USS Indianapolis was gone. One of the largest ships in the Navy vanished. She took 300 men down with her immediately, but 900 men were left bobbing in the black oil-slicked water. Silence returned to the Pacific. The survivors were scattered over miles. Most were covered in thick black fuel oil. It clogged their noses, burned their eyes, and made them vomit. But strangely, the oil also protected them from the sun later on. They formed groups. Some held hands, some tied life jackets together. They were terrified, yes, but they were also hopeful. "The Navy will miss us," they told each other. "They'll be here by morning." They didn't know that the SOS had been ignored. They didn't know that due to a mix-up in arrival logs, no one in Leyte knew they were coming. They didn't know that they had just entered a world where they were no longer the top of the food chain. Monday morning broke, July 30th. The sun came up, and the horror became visible. Hundreds of men, some badly burned, some with broken limbs. Dr. Lewis Haynes, the ship's chief medical officer, became a saint in hell. He swam from group to group, poking fingers into eyes to check for life reflexes. If the eye didn't move, he cut the life jacket off the body to give it to a living man and let the dead sink. "I let go of 50 men that first hour," he later said. And then the guests arrived. Oceanic white-tip sharks. Jacques Cousteau called them the most dangerous of all sharks. Unlike great whites, which are ambush predators. Whitetips are scavengers. They are persistent. They are bold. The explosions and the blood in the water rang a dinner bell that could be heard for miles underwater. At first, they were curious. They circled. They bumped the sailors' legs to test them. The men screamed and kicked. They formed shark watches. When a fin approached, everyone would kick and splash and yell to scare it away. It worked for a while, but the sharks were patient. They knew these men weren't going anywhere. Day 1 ended. No planes, no ships. Thirst began to set in. You have to understand, floating in salt water is torture. The water is all around you, cool and clear, but you can't drink a drop. Dehydration thickens the blood. The brain starts to shrink. Logic fades. As the sun went down on the first day, the kicking and splashing slowed down. The men were getting tired. And the sharks were getting hungry. That night, the feeding began. It started with the dead. The sharks would pull the bodies under. Then they went for the wounded. The smell of blood was irresistible. In the darkness, you couldn't see them coming. You just felt the water displace. Then a pressure. Then the person next to you, the person you were talking to just seconds ago, was jerked violently underwater. No splash. Just gone. Then, a few seconds later, his life jacket would pop back up to the surface. Empty. By Tuesday morning, the sharks were still there, but a new enemy had arrived. Madness. Thirst is a cruel killer. As the body dehydrates, the brain begins to misfire. Some men couldn't take it anymore. They looked at the ocean water, clear, cool, inviting, and they broke the golden rule of survival. They drank the salt water. The result was immediate. Saltwater poisoning sends the brain into violent delirium. Men began to foam at the mouth. Their eyes rolled back. They started screaming. And then came the hallucinations. These weren't just visions. They were shared nightmares. One man yelled, "The ship hasn't sunk. It's just below the surface. The galley is open and they have cold milk." He dove down to get a drink. He never came back up. Another group believed there was an island just over the horizon. They untied themselves from the group and swam away into the empty ocean. The sharks followed them. By Wednesday, the discipline had collapsed. Paranoia set in. In their delirium, sailors thought their friends were Japanese spies trying to kill them. Fights broke out. Men stabbed each other with survival knives. They drowned each other. The splashing and the blood triggered a feeding frenzy. Dr. Haynes recalled holding men in his arms as they died, listening to them talk to their wives and children back home, while sharks bumped against his own legs. It was hell on earth. Thursday morning, day 4. The survivors were barely human. Their skin was ulcerated by the oil and salt. Their tongues were swollen so large they couldn't speak. They had accepted death. But at 11 a.m., a miracle happened. and it happened by pure accident. Lieutenant Wilbur Gwynn was flying a routine patrol. He wasn't looking for the Indianapolis. He didn't even know it was missing. He was struggling with a broken antenna wire. He went to the back of the plane to reel it in and looked down through an open hatch. He saw a massive oil slick. At first he thought it was an enemy submarine venting fuel. He dove to attack. As he got closer, his heart stopped. Those weren't debris. Those were heads, hundreds of them. Gwynn radioed, "Many men in water!" The Navy finally woke up, but for the men in the water, help couldn't wait. The sharks were attacking in broad daylight now, emboldened by the weakened state of the prey. Lieutenant Adrian Marks arrived in a PBY Catalina seaplane. He saw sharks attacking stragglers. He saw the water turning red. His orders were strict. Do not land. The swells are too high. Just drop supplies. Marks looked at the men dying. He looked at his orders. He threw the rule book out the window. He executed an open ocean landing in 12-foot swells. The plane was damaged, but it floated. Marks taxied his plane between the swimmers and the sharks. He pulled men out of the water. When the cabin was full, he put men on the wings. He turned his fragile airplane into a life raft. That night, 56 men survived solely because they were sitting on top of Adrian Marks's airplane wings, high enough that the sharks couldn't reach them. Around midnight, the USS Cecil J. Doyle arrived. The captain turned on his giant searchlight, beaming a pillar of light into the sky. It was a beacon of hope. The nightmare was over. Of the 1,195 crew, only 316 survived. Captain McVeigh was one of them, but his war wasn't over.
The Navy needed someone to blame. They couldn't blame the intelligence officers who failed to warn McVeigh about the subs. They couldn't blame the port directors who failed to notice the ship was missing for 4 days. So, they blamed the survivor. Captain Charles McVeigh III was court-martialed. The charge? Failure to zigzag. In a move that shocked the public, the Navy brought in Mochitsuda Hashimoto, the Japanese submarine commander who sank the ship, to testify against McVeigh. But Hashimoto's testimony backfired. He told the court, "It would not have mattered if he zigzagged. I would have hit him anyway." It didn't matter. The verdict was already decided. McVeigh was found guilty. He was the only captain in U.S. Navy history to be court-martialed for losing a ship in wartime. Though his sentence was remitted, his career was over, but the punishment continued. For decades, McVeigh received hate mail from the grieving families of the dead sailors. "Why did you survive when my son died?" they wrote. "Merry Christmas, you murderer." The guilt, the trauma, and the hatred were too much. In 1968, using his Navy-issued revolver, Charles McVeigh took his own life. He was the last victim of the USS Indianapolis.
But the story doesn't end in darkness. In 1996, a 12-year-old boy named Hunter Scott started a school history project. He interviewed the survivors. He asked questions the adults were too afraid to ask. His project sparked a national movement. The survivors rallied one last time, not to fight sharks, but to fight for their captain's honor. In October 2000, the U.S. Congress passed a resolution exonerating Captain McVeigh. The Navy finally admitted he was innocent. It came too late to save his life, but it saved his legacy. The USS Indianapolis delivered the weapon that ended the war. Her crew paid for peace with their lives. They faced the most primal fear imaginable, being eaten alive, alone in the dark. Yet when the survivors gather today, they don't talk about the sharks. They talk about the men who gave their life jackets to others. They talk about the pilot who landed in the ocean. They talk about brotherhood. War is hell, but sometimes in the middle of hell you find angels. If this story moved you, please honor these men by hitting the like button. Subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments, was Captain McVeigh treated fairly? I'm Channel Name, and I'll see you in the next chapter of history.